This is Sky News at 12, the headlines. The Remain ship has sailed. Jeremy Corbyn rules out a second referendum. The grandfather of a teenage car crash victim pays tribute as police hunt a second man said to have fled the scene. Protests across Russia against the government as the man who called them in arrested in Moscow. Paris prepares, the French capital now just hours away from the peak flood surge. Building on success, Lego celebrates 60 years at the top of the toy box. And in sport, Roger Federer wins the Australian Open for his 20th Grand Slam title. A very good afternoon to you. Jeremy Corbyn appears to have ruled out a second referendum on Brexit, saying that ship has sailed. The Labour leader finally clarified his party's position after a string of key figures, including his deputy and shadow Brexit secretary, failed to rule out the possibility of a new public vote in future. Meanwhile, a senior EU Trade Commissioner has said that the door is open if Britain sought to reverse its vote.
The referendum gave us the result. It did. We wanted to remain a reform, but that ship has sailed. And so what we wanted to do was say we've got to protect jobs, supply chains on both sides of the channel. There has to be the closest possible trading relationship with Europe. There has to be a tariff-free access to European markets and tariff-free access for European to trade with Britain.
That's the objective.
That's where we're going to with the objective,
to get that.
This now from Westminster is our political correspondent, Lewis Goodall. And Lewis, Jeremy Corbyn finally clarifying his position on the second referendum.
Yes, although in fairness, I suppose Jeremy Corbyn himself has been reasonably consistent in saying whenever he's asked he didn't think that there ought to be a second referendum, as you seem to express their anxiety that the Prime Minister is starting to renege on some of those promises, that she might deliver a softer Brexit than they might have liked. And all of these rumours swirling around that we've seen, that there might be letters of no confidence going in to the chairman of the Conservative 1922 committee. I've been speaking to lots of MPs today. They're all pretty convinced. None of them have come from Remainer MPs. They're coming from Leaver MPs. That could be very dangerous for the Prime Minister indeed in the coming days. OK, Lewis, thank you. A grandfather has paid tribute to his teenage grandson killed in a fatal car crash in West London. George Wilkinson died alongside his two friends, Harry Rice and Josh Kennedy, as they walked to a 16th birthday party. It comes as police hunt for a second man thought to have fled the scene after a car hit the group. Well, Adele Robinson is at the scene of the accident in West London for us. Adele, just bring us up to date with the latest.
Well, police continue to question a 28-year-old man on suspicion of causing death by dangerous driving on Friday night, so they're appealing for anyone who saw anything to get in touch.
OK, Adele, thanks ever so much. Mass protests are underway in Russia and cities across the country against President Putin's bid to run for another term in office. The rallies, organised by supporters of opposition leader Alexei Navalny, are calling on voters to boycott the upcoming presidential election. Conflicting reports of why police raided the Moscow headquarters of Mr. Navalny this morning. Let's go live now to our correspondent Dominic Waghorn, who's in Moscow. And Dominic, how significant could these protests be? Clearly one where you are at the moment.
Well, they're significant because they show there is a popular resentment and opposition to Vladimir Putin just ahead of those presidential elections in March. OK, Dominic, thank you. More than 200 French towns continue to struggle against floodwaters this weekend after weeks of heavy rain. The River Seine that runs through Paris is expected to reach peak levels this afternoon. Well, joining me live now from Paris is journalist Peter Allen. Very good afternoon to you, Peter. Just talk us through what the situation is there at the moment.
Hello, Rebecca. The Seine's about 5.7 metres above what it should be at this time of year. I'm just about 100 yards now from the Pont Neuf, which is the oldest bridge in Paris, and it's well up. And you must remember, it's a huge brown surge. It isn't how we love to imagine the Seine, a beautiful romantic river of love and romance and all those lovely things we associate with the river. It really is a pretty disgusting sight at the moment. It's one of the most polluted rivers in Europe still. There's all kinds of unpleasant things which are being washed out, including massive colonies of rats which are coming into the town. We're not doing as badly here as the outlying areas of Paris. There's about 700 homes that have been evacuated. Hospitals have been evacuated as well. The great fear here in the centre is that artworks in the Louvre might be affected. The Louvre, again, is just around the corner from here and has lots of basements full of priceless art treasures. They've already shut the Islamic art bit of the Louvre because it's on ground level, but it's the basements they're really worrying about.
Paris has a history of flooding. How exactly does this compare?
It actually compares pretty well with as recently as just 2 years ago in 2016. The highest level it got was about 6.1. We're at 5.7 meters now. The really big flood was in 1910, which was 8.62 meters, so a little bit below his historical worst, as it were. But, of course, it's still rising. They thought the peak would be reached on Friday, but here we are on Sunday afternoon. It's still going up, and this saga could go into next week.
And what kind of steps are residents taking to protect their homes? You mentioned people outside of Paris have actually been evacuated, but how about those still in their homes?
Well, those in their homes, remember, a lot of people are lucky enough to live quite high up in Paris. It's a flat city, an apartment city, but their businesses low down. They're doing the usual things, putting sandbags outside. But in the end, they just have to wait for the worst. And if the worst happens, deal with it accordingly. There's not much you can do when a massive river like the Seine bursts its banks. And of course, that is always the great fear.
And you mentioned earlier all sorts of concerns, I mean, rats especially. Is there a public health warning at the moment? What's the warning to residents?
There is. Remember, the Seine is it's extremely polluted. Over centuries, historians have called it an open sewer. It's improved a little bit over the last 10, 15 years or so, but it's pretty disgusting. And all kinds of precautions. I think the best advice is to try and avoid the rats, because if you're bitten by one of them, you could get a really pretty horrific disease. And of course, try and stay away from the water itself, which isn't very healthy at all.
Well, we expect peak levels later on this afternoon, so we wish you well and hope that things calm down a little there a bit later on. Thanks ever so much for your expertise. Well, let's bring you now the stark findings of a Sky Data poll into the public's perception of social care provision. 70% of people we asked said social care has got worse in recent years. Only 8% believe it's improved. And the blame is falling squarely at the government's door, with 59% of people saying it's the fault of the Department of Health. Well, only 1 in 5 people we asked blame local authorities, who are the ones who more often than not provide the care. So what needs to happen to fix a system that's creaking to breaking point, according to those on the front line? Neil Patterson went to Liverpool to find out.
Adult social care is often described as the front and back door to the NHS. It's difficult to believe, but more people work in social care than in the health service, yet only one has its funding ring-fenced. The government has made much of its efforts to secure parity of esteem for physical and mental health. Given its role in relieving the burden on the NHS, is it too much to ask to place social care and healthcare on a similarly equal footing? Neil Patterson, Sky News.
Well, the Department of Health and Social Care has sent us a statement, and in that statement they said, we are committed to integrating health and social care so that people can access the high quality of care that they expect and deserve. And they go on to say the ageing population presents one of our nation's most profound challenges. That's why we've provided £2 billion in additional funding for the sector, and will publish plans to reform the social care system to make it more sustainable in the future. You're watching Sky News. Coming up, as Lego celebrates its 60th birthday, we dive into the origins of the coloured bricks. Welcome back. Let's get a check now on what's coming up in the sports.
Yeah, full bulletin coming up at 1:45, paying tribute to Roger Federer, getting about the FA Cup with Chelsea in action.
OK, Nick, thank you. Now, it all started off as a simple brick toy for children, but Lego has gone on to become one of the biggest global brands, spawning theme parks, movies and even video games. Well, as the brand celebrates its 60th birthday, we sent our senior correspondent Ian Woods in search of Lego's humble origins.
At first glance, it looks like this shop has been given a fresh lick of paint. But look closely, and you'll see the new brickwork in the next 60 years. Ian Woods, Sky News.
Time now for a check on the weather.
By the springtime flowers of a mountain lake, to the first snowfall on a winter's day.
It'll be mild and windy today with plenty of cloud cover for most. Rain over Scotland will slowly be moving and heavy at times. For much of the country, though, it'll be a fine afternoon with cloud thinning and breaking in favoured spots. Temperatures will reach a high of 14, possibly 15 degrees Celsius. Of course, that's 57 Fahrenheit, but it will stay breezy, I'm afraid. The rain over Scotland will push northwards before returning southwards later on, and such sustained rainfall may lead to some significant rainfall totals in places. Overnight, the rain will sweep southwards, leaving colder, clearer conditions in the north with a scattering of showers. By morning, the wet weather will lie across the Republic of Ireland and northern England, with counties to the south remaining mostly dry and very mild.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
You're watching Sky News. Coming up, a call for Conservatives to come together and show mutual respect. The latest on the divisions within the party. You're watching Sky News at 12. The top stories this hour. Jeremy Corbyn has suggested that there'll be no going back on the Brexit vote, saying that ship has sailed. The grandfather of one of the 3 teens killed in a fatal car crash in West London has paid tribute to him. Russia's opposition leader has been arrested in Moscow just as his supporters began mass demonstrations around the country against President Putin's bid to run for another term in office. Well, let's get more now on the Brexit fallout from this morning's political shows. Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn has ruled out a second referendum, while Conservative Cabinet Minister David Lidington has urged the Tories to come together in a spirit of mutual respect. Well, joining me now from Westminster is Ben Glaze, the Deputy Political Editor at the Daily Mirror, and Lynn Davidson, who's the Whitehall correspondent for The Sun. Let's start off with you then, Ben. Your reaction to the Sunday Times investigation that 3 former Tory ministers may have been profiting from Brexit.
Yes, it's another one of those undercover stings, really, by a newspaper. And once again, 3 prominent Tories have fallen straight into the trap. They were offered to work for a Chinese company that wanted to know more about the government's thinking on Brexit. Of course, there was no Chinese company, really. So we had Lord Lansley, the former Health Secretary, Andrew Mitchell, the former Chief Whip, and Peter Lilly, who once upon a time was deputy leader of the party. They all went along, had an interview, talked up, what they could do for this company, and then got turned over by the Sunday Times. They all claimed they'd smelt a rat, which does beg the question why they went along with it.
Lynn, they haven't done anything illegal. Should be able to be a lobbyist and a legislator at the same time?
Well, it's difficult, isn't it, if you're a member of the public reading these allegations and watching the programme, which is due to be broadcast next week. I think you will have perhaps an entirely different point of view. What they all say is that, someone like Andrew Mitchell will say, I've got a job, I do work outside Parliament, I earn money outside Parliament, I declare all of that. But I think what will be interesting to find out is that Peter Lilly, who has been touted as a potential peer, who we think has been on a list of potential peers, whether he will actually get one. Baroness Evans, the leader of the House of Lords, was on one of the political programmes this morning, and she was making some hints talking about how Theresa May could be filling the House with more Tory peers, but she has not in fact done so. It'll be interesting to see if Peter Lilly's name is still on that list in the coming weeks.
It is interesting indeed. Let's go back to you then, Ben. Do you think it's right these people clearly spent their lives building up political sway and contacts in that sphere? Is it right that they should then be able to take on other work elsewhere?
I do think that MPs should be allowed second jobs, yes. Sort of expertise from the outside world, I think, helps them as parliamentarians. but getting rich off the contacts they've made, off the knowledge that they've garnered from being, at the heart of politics over many years, decades in some cases. No, that doesn't feel right, I don't think, and the public won't like it because we're 9 years on now from the major expenses row, and people have still got this perception, really, of MPs who are just on the make. And situations like this, they just fuel that sort of perception.
Lynn, do you think reform is now needed in the House of Lords?
Well, is reform needed? There are hundreds and hundreds of them that come in that claim expenses every day. Of course reform is needed in the House of Lords. I think people find it very hard to understand how you can get in there and you get paid your £300 a day for turning up. Simply, there is work done there that is legitimate, and the scrutiny of bills. But I think the public, I absolutely think there is room for reform, and I think overwhelmingly the public would support it. I'm not sure if the public would be interested in another referendum on whether we should have reform or another House of Lords. But yeah, reform definitely needed.
Lynn, staying with you, how damaging do you think this latest sting is for Theresa May? Because it's not been a great week for her, has it?
No, it's not. But it's a combination of a lot of not very great weeks for Theresa May. Like, she had the problem for her is power and control, and people thinking she doesn't have control of her cabinet, and the weakness that people see that she has. So we had Philip Hammond going off-piste last week with making some comments that really upset Brexiteers, and we have this kind of situation now where the Brexiteers are anxious because they think if Theresa May were to go, they could end up with someone like Philip Hammond or someone like Amber Rudd, who are Remainers. And on the other side of the coin, the Remainers are quite anxious as well because they feel that if Theresa May were to go, they could end up with someone like Boris Johnson or Michael Gove, which would be a worst-case scenario for them. So I think at the moment there's a bit of a standoff and people are quite anxious. And what Jacob Rees-Mogg was saying earlier on one of the political programmes, he was talking about how Theresa May needs to be clear. She needs to make her Brexit position clear on the timetable. So when is this transition going to end? They've talked about a two-year transition period, but there really needs to be proper cut-offs. So that everyone knows her position now. The Cabinet haven't discussed this. Everyone needs to know what the Cabinet's position is, and there's a lot of fluff and anxious Remainers and Brexiteers on both sides, which is creating this kind of situation that we've got now.
OK, Ben, do you agree? Because say what you will about Theresa May, this piles more pressure on her, but she has been incredibly resilient. She keeps bouncing back, I suppose.
Well, she does, and she finds herself trapped in the middle now between the soft Brexiteers of the Conservative Party, those arch Remainers, people like Nicky Morgan, people like Justine Greening now and Anna Soubry. And then on the other side, she's got the hard Brexiteers, the Jacob Rees-Moggs, the Owen Pattersons of the world. And both factions are sort of trying to pull her one way or the other. And it's been really interesting, I think, over the past, or this weekend, to see how the Brexiteers have really tried to box the Prime Minister in. They're trying to force her to come out and give them some words of comfort about how hard a Brexit she's actually going to pursue. And Jacob Rees-Mogg, it's amazing, but he's the bookie's favourite to succeed Theresa May as the leader of the Conservative Party, which I think we all in Westminster find fantastical. But the fact that he's being so prominent and as the chairman of the European Research Group now, which is the hardcore backbenchers of the Conservative Party, he's got a platform from which to try and force the Prime Minister into that hard Brexit that the Chancellor is so keen to avoid.
Well, Brexit seems to surround everything at the moment, and Jeremy Corbyn coming out today clarifying his position, almost, that he doesn't agree with a second referendum because that ship has sailed. Lynn, it's taken him some time to clarify it.
Yes, you could hear all those Labour Remainer hearts breaking around Westminster this morning when Jeremy Corbyn revealed that they would not be asking for a second referendum. He's hinted at it in the past. People like the Shadow Brexit Secretary, Sir Keir Starmer, all these people have kind of left the door open for that to happen. Jeremy Corbyn has slammed it shut. And I think that it's probably quite welcome news. At least Labour know their position now, and it's been laid out for them finally.
Ben, The Brexit bill is going to be debated in the House of Lords. There has been a suggestion that it's been watered down by the government to get it through and not too much defeat against it. What do you make of that?
Of the watering down? I mean, they've got to try and find some consensus to get this through, because the House of Lords, this unelected chamber with hundreds and hundreds of peers, they're not answerable to the public. So there's a majority for Remain in the House of Lords, and of course the Conservative Party doesn't have a majority in the House of Lords. There seem to be some mutterings that it might be a slightly easier passage than Theresa May would have been fearing. But the real battle will be once it comes back to the House of Commons and Jeremy Corbyn ruling out that second referendum. He's been trying to survive off the ambiguity and relishing the ambiguity of not saying one thing or another on Brexit. But you have to bear in mind, for 30 years he was a backbencher who regularly spoke out against the EU and would have been classed as a Brexiteer. And he only sort of found this Damascene conversion towards the EU upon becoming Labour leader in September 2015. And yeah, the Remainers in the Labour Party, of whom they are in the majority, they'll have been very disappointed at him finally ruling out a second referendum. And I think a lot of the young supporters who turned to Labour at last June's general election, they too will be disappointed. And I think it's open to the Lib Dems now to finally try and exploit their pro-Remain, their second referendum policy, and see if they can steal some of Labour's supporters.
OK, Lynn, Ben, thanks ever so much for your thoughts. You're watching Sky News. Coming up, action and tears from Australia as Roger Federer makes history again at the age of 36. Now, your 16th birthday gives you access to a range of rights and privileges. You can join the army, buy a lottery ticket and even drive a moped. But unless you live in Scotland, you're unable to vote until you turn 18. And that's about to change in another part of the United Kingdom too. The Welsh Government has today announced that they'll allow 16 and 17-year-olds to vote in local elections in the hope of engaging more young people in political debate. Well, I've been to canvass some young prospective Welsh voters. When it comes to elections, as we found out last year, young voters are able to get their voices heard and make a big difference. Here in Wales, 16 and 17-year-olds are now to be given the right to take part in local council elections, which has had mixed reactions from that age group at this youth group in Cardiff.
Education is something that we usually aren't able to impact, despite the fact that it is, for most young people, the main part of their life, I suppose. And to be able to sort of impact it now, even on a local level where it might not necessarily be affected, because it is up to the Senedd about Welsh education, then it's only a good thing.
I think it's a great idea because it'll open more opportunity for other people to put their input in and ideas, rather than it just being dedicated to the 18 and above audience.
They're just not mature enough, I don't think. Like, they're in that stage of life where they're still deciding things, like their personal things. So I just don't think they're ready to decide.
In recent years, politicians have done their best to try and woo younger voters. Jeremy Corbyn had endless demands for selfies and even gave a speech at Glastonbury, and that was all aimed at targeting younger voters. This is the very heart of the Welsh Government, and the whole point of these changes is to encourage more people to turn out and vote. They hope by getting younger people involved with the election process, it'll seem more welcoming and certainly more transparent. In Scotland, 16-year-olds can already vote in all elections. The idea was given a boost during the 2014 independence referendum, and many now think it should be introduced across the UK.
This is a great opportunity here for Welsh young people to do what Scottish young people have done and start their public participation younger and keep going through their adulthood. It's really time for England to catch up with this.
Well, 16-year-olds in Wales will soon be able to vote in local council elections. In Westminster, MPs have already ruled out lowering the voting age across the UK. 18 is adulthood, says the government, and that's when full citizenship rights from betting to drinking and to voting are gained. Rebecca Williams, Sky News in Cardiff. Time now to get a check on the sport.
This programme is brought to you by Vitality Health and Life Insurance.
Ah, lifting a leg. My speciality. Oh, sorry.
Getting active brings its own rewards.
Thanks, Rebecca. Good afternoon. Roger Federer has called his career an incredible fairy tale. He's to that on Sky Sports News, and we're back at 1:20.
And that's the end of the show. I'm off for a biscuit. Anyone fancy?
Now, we just got time to show you this footage. 6 adults and an unconscious baby have been rescued after spending 4 days drifting in a life raft in the Pacific Ocean. They're believed to be the only survivors after the ferry that they were on board sank between 2 islands. At least 50 people were on board at the time. And a surveillance camera has captured the moment that a wild Asian elephant went on a border tour for 2 hours. Taking advantage of the dark, it went for a wander from Yunnan province in central South China and then into neighbouring Luan Namtha in Laos. Soldiers on duty immediately dispatched 2 teams to look for the elephant and reminded nearby residents to keep a watchful eye. There he goes on his journey. Time now to get a check on the weather.
From the clear blue sky of a Doha morning to the fresh autumn breeze in the city of love.
It'll be mild and windy today with plenty of cloud cover for most. Rain over Scotland will be slowing down and moving at heavy at times. For much of the country, though, it will be fine this afternoon with cloud thinning and breaking in favoured spots. Temperatures will reach a high of 14, possibly 15 degrees Celsius. That, of course, at 57 Fahrenheit, but it will stay breezy. The rain over Scotland will push northwards before returning southwards later on, and such sustained rainfall may lead to some significant rainfall totals in places. Now, overnight, the rain will sweep southwards, leaving colder, clearer conditions in the north with a scattering of showers. By morning, the wet weather will lie across the Republic of Ireland and northern England, with countries to the south remaining mostly dry and very mild.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
You're watching Sky News. Coming up, the grandfather of a teenage car crash victim speaks out about his loss. Of course, that accident happening yesterday in the early hours of this morning. We'll have the very latest on that coming up after the break.